Hello there YouTube, it's Mr. John Z here with another Hammer Editor tutorial, and I'm making this tutorial based on a question about Google SketchUp and how it relates to Hammer. I didn't know this at the time, but apparently you can use Google SketchUp to make your own maps or kind of lay them out sort of with brushes and then import that into Hammer. The watcher was the guy who sent me the message was a little bit confused about how or that import process and what's exactly going on in terms of brushes and so on. Wasn't too many details, but I had to go in and do some research, and I thought I'd share with you what I found about using SketchUp and what it means when you import into Hammer, and then the little things that I found might be interesting to you. So I'm going to assume for this tutorial that you've already installed Google SketchUp. That's very easy, and I'm going to assume that you've installed the plugins that you use for Google SketchUp from the Valve Hammer editor, and that's also very simple. If you have not, I put the links in the video description for this video, and it doesn't take very long. It's simply dragging and dropping files from one end of your Explorer to another, and it should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead, assuming that you've already done that. If you haven't, go on and stop the video and come back when you have. So I'm also going to be breaking this video up into kind of fading out segments, so that way my voice can sync up with the computer better, I hope. All right, here we go. We're going to first open up Google SketchUp, and it doesn't really matter what template you choose. But we want to, let's open up the sample file that is given to us from the Valve Hammer Editor plugins, so we can kind of see where we're starting off. So I'm going to navigate there right now. I'm going to go to File, Open in SketchUp, and I put mine, or it should be under Google SketchUp, wherever your Google SketchUp is, and then in Plugins. And if you've installed the plugins correctly, you should have these two files, Valve and Valve Library. Go ahead and select Valve Library, and then the file we want under here is myfirst_su_level, although it doesn't really matter which level you choose. Files read only, not a big deal. But here we are, we have our level. We've got some stuff going on in here, and I'm going to spend the next couple of moments talking about how all this, or three things that I feel people should know about how to make brushes, which is probably the most important thing, and then two separately things, how to, or what it means to put textures in on Google SketchUp, and what it means to put entities in on Google SketchUp, because you can clearly see that we've got some textures here. This gray texture over here is orange one, and very clearly the brick one, that are obviously Hammer textures if you're familiar with Hammer. And then over here we've got this kind of polyhedral little entity action. It's a light, so, and it will show up as a light in Hammer. So what all that means and how you can make this work for you in SketchUp. But we're going to start with brushes. So to start making brushes in Google SketchUp, first you got to make sure you get your units right. You want things to be as close as you can to the Hammer units used in the Hammer editor. So in order to do that, we're going to go to Window, Model Info, and right here where it says Units, we're going to change whatever, I've already changed this already, but suppose it started at architectural 1/2 or something like that. You want to change it to decimal, and then for precision, it needs to be just 0. So we're going to have no decimal places, which means no fractions. We're not going to have fractions of inches in our Google SketchUp, and that will port over pretty well into Hammer, because Hammer, if you've snapped onto the grid, which hopefully you've been doing if you've been making maps in Hammer, then this will automatically make your Google SketchUp stuff snap onto the grid of at least 1 inch at a time. This is good because it'll help you in the long run to deal with things like map leaks and brushes going inside of brushes and other nasty stuff that might happen if you don't have snap on the grid, or you don't have this precision set up. With that done, it's time to make a brush. And making brushes it's pretty simple. There's just a couple of rules you need to keep in mind. First, let's go over here and let's get this face tool right here, this little block action, and we're going to make a square. The first rule is you don't want to have anything that's just a face from SketchUp moving into Hammer. Now, Hammer doesn't like things that only have or that don't have volume. Everything has to have a volume if it's a brush. So this will very obviously not be a brush. If you try to import the file directly right now, you're going to get an error with this brush or this face, and it won't import at all. It needs to have some volume to it, at least one Hammer unit of volume. So we're going to take this extrude button here. We're going to extrude this. And I am a bad SketchUp tutorial person, but I'm just trying to get through this part so we can get to that nice juicy Hammer editor stuff. We're going to extrude this out. You're going to make whatever kind of shape you want. I'm going to make this simple block. And right now it's just 6 faces making up what looks to be a block. We're going to turn those 6 faces into an actual brush that Hammer can use. In order to do that, we're going to have to select everything. You can either select them individually, or you can select the entire block by triple-clicking on the whole thing. That'll select it. We're going to right-click, hit Make Group. Now we've made the block is all together, and we can move it around. You can upside down, and you can just twist it or whatever. We're going to just keep it like this, so we know how to identify it when we move into the game. But using that method, we've got this block, and if the block is a group, it will show up as an independent brush in Hammer. Same with this block, this block, this block, and then the walls and floor of our room. These are not blocks, and the entities will not be shown up as brushes for separate reasons, which I will go into momentarily. I'm just going to make this one block for demonstration purposes, and now we're going to try just to test the map, see what happens. Actually, exporting a map is very simple. If you've got the plugins installed correctly, all you have to do is go up here to Plugins, and then click Export VMF. We're going to get this, save it someplace. I'm going to call it my first SU level _ brush, because we made a new brush. Save that. You're going to get this little error, Hammer time warning, unsupported stuff. Not a big deal. I'm not sure what it means, and I'm pretty sure nobody else does either. But if you do, post it in the comments, because I'd like to know. Anyway, with that done, we're going to boot up Hammer and see what is going on, and if it's exported correctly and what it looks like. So here we go, open. We're going to go to, I saved mine on desktop, so my first SU level brush, open it up, and here's our map. Just the same as it was in Google SketchUp, except in Google SketchUp they removed this front wall so you could kind of see inside. The inside is actually here in Hammer, and you can go in and see it. We've got our textures, we've got our lights, we've got all of our geometry in here, and a little hidden player spawn back there. And out here we've also got our block that we made, and it's just as it was in Google SketchUp. So it really is that easy to make brushes and import them into Hammer, and that's probably what you'll be spending most of your time doing. The interesting stuff comes in when you start dealing with textures and entities, and that's the next part that I'm going to cover. For textures and entities, you should understand that anything that goes in here into Google SketchUp is not necessarily imported into Hammer if it's one of these things, these textures and entities. The brushes, the faces and such most certainly are. But these textures, as they exist right now, are not exactly what gets imported. It's only the names of the textures, and this is where things get really interesting. So I'm going to open up this paint bucket thing right here. And again, I really don't know the terms because I don't use SketchUp. We're going to select the eyedropper and then click on this wall over here. We've very clearly got something called dev/dev measure wall 01B. That's the name of this texture in SketchUp, and it just so happens to be the same name of the texture as it exists in Hammer. What gets imported over into Hammer is the name only. And I'll demonstrate this by making a new texture. So I'm going to click on this little box, and I'll make a new material. I'm going to call it crap, and give it a nice pseudo purple color. It looks kind of like this. I'm going to say OK, and we're going to put it on the floor. So now we've got this crazy blue funky color on the floor. It's called crap. This will not actually import into Hammer because the name is the only thing that's imported, and the name does not match up with anything in Hammer. But you can use this to your advantage. You can go into Hammer and then select the name of a texture that you want and put that name into or onto one of the textures that you have in SketchUp, and that will import over into Hammer, like so. So let's open up Hammer. And let's find a texture that we would like to, something visible. I'm going to pick the trigger texture because I like it. Here it is right here. It's called Tools/Tools Trigger. We're going to use that name in Hammer, or in SketchUp, and we should get a trigger texture. So let's go over here to this gray block thing over here. Let's eyedropper that. And let's rename this dev/dev activity tools/tools texture. Wait, no, that's not it. It's tools trigger. Sorry. Oops. Tools trigger. So that name will get imported over into Hammer, and anything with that name on it in any group in SketchUp with that name on it will get assigned that texture in Hammer. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to, once again, go to Plugins, Export VMF, and I'm going to name this underscore textures. We'll get the error again, no big deal. And now we're going to go back and open up Hammer. Here we are. I'm going to close our old file, and I'm going to open up our new one, My First SU Level Textures. Now if we go inside, we're going to clearly see, okay, cool, interesting. I'm going to open up the, I'm going to click on this texture editor real quick. If you click on the ground here, we've got this current texture, which is no texture at all. It's called crap. And obviously there is no crap texture in Hammer unless you made one yourself. And this texture over here is not actually what it looks like in SketchUp either. It's the trigger texture. So you can actually make textures in SketchUp, is what I'm saying, and they can look like whatever you want, and as long as they're named a texture that appears in Hammer, then it will show up in Hammer. So it can get kind of confusing if you name all of your textures, obviously, and they all look really funky, and you don't have anything that corresponds to textures in SketchUp versus in Hammer. There are ways to actually unload all of the textures that are in Valve games. They're in some CFG files, and extract all the pictures of textures and be able to use them to get a better view of what they will look like in SketchUp. So they probably extracted these this brick texture and then these developer textures over here, for example. I'm not going to go into detail on how to do that, but I will post the link in the video description in case you're interested. Otherwise, I think it might be just better to do all the geometry and then just do some representative textures like no draw and these developer textures over here, and then use Hammer edit, go into the Hammer editor and use that to do your texture work. But it's entirely up to you. What's interesting is that this naming rule idea also applies to entities. So let's go over here to this, we're this funky little polyhedral entity thing. And let's check this out. So I'm going to click on it, and then I'll right click and hit entity info at the top. And the name of this, the definition name, is ENT_light. So what's happened here is somebody somewhere who's making this example map made this little model of a light bulb inside this polyhedron and decided that that was going to be the representation for a light entity in Hammer. What Hammer does is it reads this name and it says, okay, ENT, that means it's going to be an entity. What's the name of the entity? Light. And in Hammer, if you don't know this already, it's just so that there is an entity called light. What's interesting is that you don't actually have to look anything like an entity in order to be an entity. You can make your own. This is the same idea that a texture doesn't actually have to look like anything that is a texture that corresponds to Hammer. It just needs to be named something that corresponds to Hammer. So we're going to make our own entity here. So I'm going to click on my face tool again. We're going to make one on the wall. Extrude this. And then I will group it up. You don't have to, I don't think. And put it wherever you want. In fact, for demonstration purposes, let's make it, let's back up a little bit and make this really crazy. So this is very clearly a long, goofy thing. And I'm gonna group it up again. Now we're gonna make this an entity. So what kind of entity do we want to make? Well, I'm gonna go back into Hammer and I'm gonna select entity, and over here in the entity drop down box, just pick any entity that you want. I'm gonna go with TF Game Rules. So there's an entity called TF Game Rules in Hammer, obviously. So, and if you're using not Team Fortress, then it could be a different entity. TF Game Rules won't show it for you, but it could be anything, right? So let's go back into SketchUp and let's select this solid right here, right click and hit entity. We're going to right click and hit make component. So now this is a component. A component is basically, from what I understand, and I could be very wrong because I don't use SketchUp, the equivalent of an entity in SketchUp. I'm going to right click, hit entity info. It's called, right now, the definition name is called group number 11. We don't want that. Let's name it something interesting, or not interesting, but let's name it after our TF game rules. So it's going to be an entity, so it needs to have the prefix ENT underscore, and then we call it the name of our entity, which is TF underscore game rules. With that set up, it doesn't actually matter what this solid looks like. It's going to get turned into the proper entity when we import it into Hammer. So let's do that now. We're going to go to, just as we did before, plugins, export VMF, and I'm going to name this something different, my first SU level underscore entity. Save it, get the error, not a big deal. We're going to go back into Hammer, close our old file, and open up my first level SU entity. Boom. So everything, you will notice that this big block is gone, and it got turned into, voila, our entity, which is in fact a TF Game Rules entity. You can prove it to yourself by right-clicking on it, checking the properties. Yes, this is definitely a TF Game Rules entity. And so that's how things work. And I imagine, or I haven't tested it with all of them, but you can probably do an entity of any type here, and it will still turn up just as it is in, or no matter what it looks like in SketchUp, it's going to turn up as an entity of whatever the entity is in Hammer. So unfortunately, that's a bit my extent of SketchUp into Hammer knowledge. I will say that you should probably just use SketchUp to build all the geometry if you're really adept at using SketchUp for your map, for whatever valve map you're trying to make, and leave the texturing and setting up of entities such as models and the game rules and things like control points or zombie spawns or what have you in whatever kind of game, and setting up lighting, because the way that you can control the entity's actual values is that you must go into Hammer and modify that stuff out. But you're certainly welcome to SketchUp, and I hope this has been a little bit enlightening. It certainly has been for me, because I didn't know anything about SketchUp before doing this tutorial. If you do have some interesting links and some resources that I'm not sure about for something that I haven't covered, I haven't been really able to find really good online tutorials or descriptions, or certainly any sort of documentation. But what I have found is all in the video description, and if you have some other suggestions, please post them and I will add them to the video description. We can crowdsource a bit and try to get this get people more knowledgeable about the subject here of SketchUp to Hammer. And hopefully it's been a good tutorial. I'll see you guys next time. Keep asking questions. If you haven't asked questions, as somebody who has, as I do read everything that you guys send me, and I do answer everybody's questions as soon as I can. Thanks, and see you next time.